Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Strangers and Exiles podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Toirac, and this is my co-host, Daniel Toirac Sr.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week where we do some Islam bashing.
Yeah.
No, we're not bashing. We're just honestly telling you the truth, what they don't tell you. So,
And it's important to know this stuff.
Heck yeah.
Just because it sounds like we're bashing doesn't mean it isn't evil. So
Tolerance, Junior. Didn't that what we saw over there in Abu Dhabi? Tolerance?
No,
Why aren't you being tolerant towards these nuts? Okay. You're in the shot. Oh, Tanya, the producer. She wanted to join.
Oh, wow.
Everyone, you just saw the producer. All right, there
It's kind
she
of a
is.
first.
Oh, that was a first.
Yeah.
On episode 21, she decides to reveal herself.
22, I think.
We're on.
Yeah.
I don't keep track of this stuff. It's too much. It's too much.
So for today, you alluded to what we would be talking about at the end of the last podcast about Islam and the slave trade.
Yep.
And obviously, we've been mentioning a lot these past few weeks how, as they've conquered all these lands throughout Europe and Africa and India, that they've been taking thousands of slaves, hundreds of thousands of slaves. So now today, we'll get more specific onto the history and even modern-day slave trade, as we have later on. So yeah, any opening thoughts before we go in?
No, I just want to get in.
I'll just get into it then.
All right. So once again, we need to ground ourselves. We need to reflect on the last X amount of episodes that we've done on Islam. And we need to firmly have an understanding that Islam says that Islam is today is not the Islam that Islam said they were in the beginning when Muhammad revealed all of this fake stuff in the Quran. All right, let's just start out from there. So the Islam, when you see the Muslims walking around today, and we're actually going to refute that in a little while towards the end of this podcast, the modern day Muslims, the message they want you to hear is a message of love and tolerance. That is what they want to say, that we're all about peace. We have been to Israel. Praise the Lord. Thank you. We encountered Muslims over there. To be honest with you, the greatest people I've ever met in my entire life. If Islam is those people, then I love Islam, not the religion. Like, I'm okay with them. The problem, my friend, like Sam likes to say, my brother in humanity, my brother down in Nazareth, my brother down there in old Jerusalem city that gave us some very nasty tasting coffee. My brothers over there in Dubai that I saw, and they were nice people. Everybody's nice. Everybody's cool, man. I mean, how are you going to be negative in front of the Burj Khalifa? No, we're all cool. And then they get into their Ferraris. And you go to Palestine, they're driving beat down like an Abu Layla, my brother in humanity. Probably one of the greatest individual human beings that I've ever met. And if I tell you guys about Abu Layla and everything he did for us in that trip to Israel, that we went and we really didn't have a strong game plan because first time there, we didn't know. Abu Layla took us under his wing. Abu Layla even got up at 5 a.m. on the last day that we were there to take our luggage to the airport for us because we had no room in our car because my wife bought too many things everywhere she went. So, lovely people. Yeah. Abu Layla invited me into his home. His daughter, which is Layla, Abu is father, the father of, and then Layla. She made us probably the greatest hummus I've ever eaten in my life and the greatest chicken that was imaginable. The whole time my mom is sitting there fearing for her life, thinking that we were going to be abducted. I said, calm. You have to trust somebody in this world, right? Abu Layla. I love Abu Layla. Guess what? Even after we came back from Jerusalem, Abu Layla would call my wife just to say hi and to make sure that we were doing okay. Who does that? This guy was a man of pure love. Mm-hmm. The problem is the Islam that Abu Layla is practicing is not the Islam that Muhammad wrote down in the Quran. That is the core, the crux of it all. What we have tried to present to you guys over these last several weeks, and we will continue this because we're going to finish this book today. And next time we are going to, sorry, I'm going to try to silence this thing. My mom just sent me a text message. Yeah, not that she's watching. How does she know? Does she know that we were talking about her?
And she always says that you mention her in the episodes.
Yeah, I mentioned her. Now you're officially mentioned again. All right. I literally got off my track. What was I talking about?
Abu Layla, nice people. They don't practice.
Exactly. Their Islam is not the Islam that Muhammad taught. So we are going to finish up this book today. And then the next 2 weeks podcast, maybe more, God willing, we don't know. We're going to talk about women in Islam, how Islam treats women. And then those episodes are gross. You're not going to like what you hear, but this is directly out of the Quran and the Hadith and the Surah, the Sirah. But we'll get to that. Be patient. So now Islam and slave trade. My entire life, I went to school. My favorite subject in class was always history, even though I always did really good at math for some reason. I hated math, but I was in calculus. But I hate it. I hated every second of it, but I was good at it. But I loved history. I loved reading about people from back then and what they went through. And I'm calling out, well, no, wait, didn't Trump take away the Department of Education?
Yeah.
Oh, crap. Who do we complain to now? We got to go to DeSantis?
Yeah,
okay.
Probably.
DeSantis, I want you to start teaching this in history. Revise the books. Give people more understanding, not to bash the Muslims, not to create Islamophobia, but so that people can be informed of what this is all about. See, they leave Islam because it's a religion, right? But it's actually a religion and politics together. You can't separate one from the other. Isn't that a song? Yeah. So what we've been teaching, I don't think it's that far off for it to be taught in school. Like, am I wrong?
No, it's history.
But then why is that every history book that I read talks about the Portuguese and talks about the Spaniards and talks about all of the people going to Cuba and Puerto Rico with all the slaves, and then the Americans, and then the American slave trade, and then the Black History Month. We talk about that. We talk about slavery. How comes nobody has talked about this that we're going to talk about right now? And I'm literally leading you guys to a point where you're like, can you just shut up and tell us? But I'm building up the anticipation. Why is it that no book has ever told me this? Let's actually see what it is. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Muslims, contrary to popular belief that it was the Portuguese and the Spanish, Muslims have been involved in the slave trade throughout their history. It is estimated, get this, that over 28 million Africans have been enslaved in the Muslim world in the past 1,400 years. Another 4 million, you're going to love this one, white Europeans. So the Muslims not only went into Africa and quote unquote took the savages or whatever they want to say, they also took white people. Of course, when you have a battalion and you have a whole fleet of ships and you have swords and you have radical natured individuals, they even went into white areas and they took them as slaves. And of course, as we know, what do they do with slaves?
Have sex with them.
If you're a male slave, guess what? You're going to be put to work. Every time they built the mosque, every time their project, that's who was doing. Basically the same things the Egyptians were doing with the Jews way back when. If you're a woman, what are you going to do? What are they going to do with you?
Have sex with you.
That's right. And if you're a child,
also put you to work.
Put you to work, raise you as a Muslim, and then now you are the next generation of jihad. That's the cookie cutter thing. And guess what? It's still going on today. We'll talk about that later. So now the history. At least 10 centuries of slavery for the benefit of the Muslim countries have been established. 4 million slaves were exported via the Red Sea. Another 4 million through the Swahili ports of the Indian Ocean. Perhaps as many as 9 million along the trans-Saharan caravan route. And 11 to 20 million across the Atlantic Ocean. Beginning in the 8th century, Arab traders on the Swahili coast in East Africa bought Zanj, Bantu, these are Africans, captives from the interior of Africa. So they didn't just go on the coastline like the Spaniards did. Spaniards didn't want to get their feet wet in the Congo. These guys were like, you know what? The Spaniards are, the Spaniards weren't around back in that time, but they actually went inside, which I found interesting. So they went to the interior of Africa, present-day Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and sold them to Muslims in Egypt, Arabia, Persia, India, and elsewhere. Eventually, tens of thousands of slaves were captured and sold every year. A 10th century caliph of Baghdad had 11,000 slaves at his palace.
Wow.
I mean, how many is too many? Because remember, you got to feed them.
Yeah.
I mean, 11,000 slaves is a lot of slaves, you know? I mean, like where do they do doo-doo? Questions that I have. When you bring in 11,000 outsiders, you have to have the basic rudimentary, like, function. Like, was the whole backyard just a bunch of little holes?
Probably.
Where they dig up? Okay, all right. Most towns and cities had a slave marketplace. Now, we know we've seen this from shows like Rome and Spartacus and all of this. You know, those are shows that we like, that we've seen kind of the imagery of this. But picture every city had like a Walmart slave store, you know, and then you would walk into the Walmart slave store and then they would have them lined up. They're all naked. They're all chained up. They're all naked. Women, children, men, and then you go and you choose. So it's like, you know, just like when you go to the meat market and you choose this pack of steak over that pack of steak because this one maybe has less veins and that one has a little bit too much fat. Same thing with the slaves. Maybe that one has too many veins. Maybe that one's too fat. So then you go and you choose and you pick your whatever you want. Now, if you're gonna buy it for sex, you're gonna want maybe someone more to your liking. If you're gonna buy them for labor, you're probably gonna look for a strong one, you know. So they are thoroughly checked by possible buyers. In Ottoman-aligned northern Africa, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli became the bases for the Muslim Barbary pirates who operated throughout the Mediterranean and into the Atlantic. They called it Christian stealing. It actually had a name, Christian stealing. It was a kind of Islamic gold rush aimed at the poorly defended shores and shipping of the Christian world. Because, of course, Christians are all about what?
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love, baby. The Muslims are all about what?
Raping, pillaging, conquering, killing.
My boy. Just so that we have a clear understanding on that. They captured thousands of ships and raided coastal towns in Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, England, Ireland, Scotland, and as far as the Netherlands and Iceland. So you could just like picture that. They didn't just hang around Africa. They were like, you know, we got to get some white ones because maybe they fetch more money, you know. So they went all throughout the known Europe and the whole United K, and then they even went up over the UK all the way over there to Netherlands and Iceland. From the 16th to the 19th century, so in other words, this is literally in the last 500 years, they captured an estimated 1 to 1.25 million white Europeans. This doesn't include those captured by Morocco and other raiders. In 1640, the minutes of the British Parliament, so this is literal written down, the minutes from the British Parliament, said, "The fishermen are afraid to put to sea, and we are forced to keep continual watches on all of our coasts. The British lost 466 ships between 1606 and 1609. Can you imagine in a 3-year span? Between 1672 and 1682, they lost another 353 British ships. Raids against settlers along the shores were relentless and sometimes netted hundreds and even thousands of captives. In 1544, this is like right there after the Reformation. This is literally in the lifetime. This is right around the time that Martin Luther would have died. In 1544, 7,000 were captured. Guess where? In the Bay of Naples, and 6,000 in Calabria in southern Italy. So at the time of the Reformation, when the Catholic Church was about to have their Council of Trent, where they were then going to go ahead and codify all of the dogma, 7,000 Italians were taken from Italy and 6,000 from Calabria. 4,000 were captured in Granada, 1,200 in Madeira. Calabria in southern Italy was a favorite target. 6,000 were taken in 1544, 700 in 1636, 1,000 in 1639, 4,000 in 1644. Sicily was attacked at least 136 times between 1570 and 1600. Sometimes in sorties that penetrated 10 or even 20 miles inland. So in other words, they didn't just kind of chill on the coastline and get whatever, a medieval margarita. They literally would go in to the land, go in, past all the pizza shops, and grab people and take them out. So in 1631, the entire population of the coastal village of Baltimore, Ireland, was captured. An entire village was taken. Only 2 or 3 ever returned. In 1741, so in other words, this is not like, once again, I know you're going to want to use the argument, well, back then they were savages and all of that. Okay, you could say that, but then again, remember, we came down from the Greeks, the Greek culture. You know, you got to remember Socrates and Plato, those guys were like 300 years before Jesus. They already had a certain level of learnedness and humanity and respectability. This is way after the age of enlightenment. This is when most of the world at this point is civil. I mean, you know, you got to understand. Now, you can make the argument for like the 700s, but even then, there was civility everywhere. But now in the 17 and 1800s, this is like crazy. Okay. Only 2 or 3 ever returned. In 1741, the entire 700 residents of Tabarca were enslaved. In 1798, 900 were taken from the island of San Pietro, St. Peter. Between 1801 and 1850, the newly formed United States fought the Barbary Wars against pirates based in Tripoli, Tunis, and Algeria. Muslim pirates had seized American merchant ships and enslaved the crews for ransom. So now the United States, like we're just starting to become a country here. We're trying to pay back the countries that lent us money to fight the Revolutionary War. I mean, I'm sorry, the Revolutionary War. I always get that one, the Civil War. Like I'm messing them. Now we have merchants because now commerce, right? We need to build up commerce. They're attacking American ships, and they're not only attacking them, they want ransom. So okay, so let's see what happens. Most of the men were pressed into hard labor and kept in extremely poor conditions that exposed them to vermin and disease. Vermin is rats. The Muslim Barbary states demanded tribute from the American government in exchange for not attacking his ships. In other words, jizya. Give me a tax and we'll stay away from their ship. We'll make sure that we look at the one that has the stars and the stripes, and we'll stay away from that one. The piracy began immediately after America gained its independence from Britain in 1784. 2 years later, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, 2 of America's founding fathers, were sent to London to negotiate with Tripoli's ambassador, Sidi Haji Abdul Rahman Adja. When asked why the Muslims attacked nations that had done them no harm, Adja replied, this was his reply, "It was written in their Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the Prophet were sinners, whom it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave." That's a real diplomatic answer, huh? And that every Muslim who was slain in this warfare was sure to go to paradise. Remember the 72 virgins, the 300 little cute boys walking around giving you pina coladas. He said, Also, that the man who was the first to board a vessel had one slave over and above his share. And that when they sprang to the deck of an enemy ship, every sailor held a dagger in each hand and a third in his mouth, which usually struck terror into the foe, that they cried out for a quarter at once. Note that Barbary pirates cited the Quran as their authority for attacking and enslaving anyone who is not submitted to Allah. In 1795, America paid $1 million for the release of 115 sailors, an amount that was 1/6 of the U.S. budget at that time. They literally had to give up 1/6 of their budget at the time just to get back. Amen for the USA. We get our guys back. The pirates demanded an annual payment of the same amount. See, now they're just milking that.
Yeah.
They're milking the jizya. When Thomas Jefferson was elected America's second president, see, this is wrong. It's his third president. He was the third president, not the second. John Adams was the second. When Thomas Jefferson was elected America's third president in 1801, he and his fellow citizens were of no mind to accept bullying and blackmail. The U.S. Navy was built to protect America against Muslim pirates. One of the most memorable acts of the Barbary War is in 1805, when a force of 8 U.S. Marines and 400 Greek and Arab mercenaries, led by U.S. Navy Lieutenant William Eaton, force marched across 600 miles of desert from Alexandria, Egypt, to the city of Derna on the shores of Tripoli. This is memorialized in the U.S. Marine hymn. By 1816, the Barbary states were forced to cease attacking American and British ships, and this was accomplished by superior force of arms. How comes I don't remember reading about this anywhere?
Never.
Like in my history classes in high school. Like, I don't remember reading any of this. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, whoa, like America, like I remember they fought the French, they fought this, they fought the English, but I never knew that they fought Muslims and they had to pay them $1 million way back when. Okay. It was a good thing that they got rid of the Department of Education. I guess they weren't doing their job, right? Meanwhile, slaving continued on the east coast of Africa. Under Omani Arabs in the 19th century, so it's the 1800s, as many as 50,000 slaves were passing through Zanzibar each year. Missionary David Livingstone, I know you guys know that name, estimated that 80,000 Africans died each year before ever reaching Zanzibar.
Wow.
Can you imagine the death, the conquering, all in the name of a fake god? The Ottomans also traded in slaves in the region of the Black Sea. These slaves were taken in raids by Tartars in Russia and Poland. An estimated 3 million white Europeans were enslaved between the 14th to the 17th century. The Ottomans had a practice called devshirme, whereby the Sultan's agents would periodically take 1/5 of all boys from Christian families. 1/5 of all boys from Christian families. It was also called a blood levy. It was introduced by Sultan Orkan in the 1300s. On a fixed date, on a fixed date, so they announce it, on this day, hey, get your kids ready, we're coming. These guys are barbarians. On a fixed date, all the Christian fathers were ordered to appear with their children in the public square. The recruiting agents chose the most sturdy and handsome children in the presence of a Muslim judge. Any father who shirked his duty to provide children was severely punished. The system was open to all kinds of abuse. The recruiting agents often took more than the prescribed number of children and sold the surplus children. Get this, they sold the surplus children back to their parents. So a Muslim can come and take you. I can't say nothing about that. But then they realize, well, I don't know, it might cost too much to feed him. So then they're like, then they come back and they say, okay, look, are you willing to buy back your son that I just took from you illegally? It's just, I'm sorry, when you read this stuff, man, you really, it gets to you because you start thinking about the millions and millions and millions of lives that have been affected by this man and this false religion. And you just start to reflect on that. And you know, you encounter guys like Abu Layla and my brother over there in Nazareth, and those guys give you a warm embrace and a hug and love, and they treat you with dignity and respect. But to see what these people are doing, like the foundation that it is built upon, and the sheer destruction and devastation and the amount of raping and pillaging and slave trading, and just thinking about how many billions of lives have been affected just because this moron who mounted a 9-year-old decided that he was going to receive revelation from Allah. He completely distorted everything that pertains to the Old and New Testament. And then he radicalizes it by saying, you know what, this religion is not working. The Jews don't like me. The Christians don't like me. The pagans aren't accepting this message. So then he says, okay, why don't we just start killing them instead, or making them convert? And then through the practices of that early in the Medina period of his life, that he decided, oh, you know what, I'm going to put a sword on their neck unless they become Muslims. And then to take the verses that supposedly the angel Gabriel had given him from Allah, which completely abrogated the previous verses of peace and love, peace and love. Now they're go kill, go kill, go kill. To see all of the devastation that has come from that in the last 1400 years. There is no way that they could say Christianity has been more devastating. When you read this, show me where the Christians, besides the Crusades, have gone and openly gone and killed millions of people. Where? Show me the proof. But we have the proof of what you guys are doing. And you guys do it in the name of Allah. And you do it because you're reading verses and then you're taking it for its literal sense, which is fine. That means that you're a true Muslim. But why do you got to cause all the devastation and the harm? And why do you got to do all of that? Why do you got to grab women and rape them? Where is the godliness in that? Where is the purity in that? Why would you take children? Why would you have sex with a 9-year-old girl? So anyway, I'm sorry. I had to go off on a little rant there. Parents who resisted were killed. Some parents deliberately mutilated their children to make them unattractive to the recruiting agents. This practice continued until 1638, but the taking of children continued until 1826. So, you know, it's just a sad state of affairs. And it's just, I don't know, it's really painful when you know, it's one thing to just read a book, a history book. It's another thing to really go through it, but to see the negative effects it has, how the decisions of one man, how in 1400 years, look at the long-term devastation it has caused. And of course, they don't teach you this. The Muslims don't teach you this. You become a Muslim, they're not teaching you any of this. They're showing you the verses that are peace and love, unless you're in a radical, like, you know, either Sunni or Shia, it doesn't matter, but because there's radical Sunnis as well. Actually, most of the radicals out there are the Sunnis. But which I would say those Sunnis are actually practicing Muslim the right way. But if you go to your local mosque, they're going to be like, hey, how you doing? Walk in, you know, and they can take off your shoes, whatever. Then they're not going to show you this message. They're not. If they did a Muslim history class, they're going to show you about all the good things. They're going to say, oh, look how we've expanded. That means that Allah is with us. Look at our expansion. Look at how we went from a few little followers in Mecca to now being the second biggest religion in the world. And they look at it as pride. Like they're very prideful of their growth, but then they don't teach you how they grew. The Muslims were not riding two boys with white T-shirts on, knocking on doors. The Muslims are not on the street corner there next to the bodega with a jw.org little cart. No. They grew because of this. They grew because of slavery. They grew because of the conquering, because of the killings and the rapings and all of that. So that's what I think about that.
And obviously, as we just saw, that they've millions upon millions, tens of millions of slaves throughout the history of Islam. Obviously, it's nearly impossible to have good living conditions for all those slaves. It's So maybe you go into the condition of the slaves as it's described here.
Okay. Obviously, we've seen historical books. I've seen one of my favorite movies of all time is Amistad. I don't know, I just love it. It's about a slave ship, and when you see the conditions they're kind of depicted within movies, you can get the idea of the level of stink that are in the bottom. Where all of them are at. But once again, it's not in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that we've had visual imagery of what the conditions may be. But we actually have some recorded history of the condition of the Muslim slaves. Some of the captives were ransomed by their families, but most ended their days as slaves. So in other words, the slaves that were taken, some of their family members were actually able to pay to buy them back, but most of them just ended up dying as slaves, dying of starvation, disease, or maltreatment. The slavers, the Muslims, would subject the newly captured people to harsh treatment to intimidate and humiliate them towards pacification. So you beat them down up until they are submissive to you. They had to endure nightmare journeys. Those captured by ships had to spend weeks, even months, on board in a living hell before they arrived on the Barbary coast. Other captives had to travel long distances over land. Now, just so you know, I'm reading to you guys this, but there's the actual proof, but they're very long paragraphs. I would be here all night just reading all these paragraphs. So they were housed in horrible, horrible prison conditions. And I'm actually going to read you this one because this one caught my eye. It's long, but let's get through it. Upon their capture, slaves were accommodated in miserable conditions in infamous underground dungeons called matamors in Africa. Each matamor accommodated 15 to 20 slaves. Into these, the only light and ventilation, the stink, came through a small iron grate in the roof. In winter, which we saw something similar to this when we went to Rome, where supposedly where Paul was imprisoned, it would have been something like that. Is basically what it's describing here. In winter, rain poured through the grate, flooding the floor. Captive Germain Mouet wrote of the horrifying living condition in matamors that the water and sewage frequently bubbled up from the mud floor. During humid summer days, the matamors, those are the jail cells, with so many people crammed inside, became filthy, stinking, and full of vermin, rats. The captives received very little food, often nothing but bread and water. On the auction day, they were driven like wild beasts, whipped and put through their paces to the market. It was called Badistan in Algiers and Tripoli, and Souk el Burka in Tunis. At the auction bazaar, the market, they were jostled through the crowd from one dealer to another. They were made to jump and skip to demonstrate their strength and agility. And fingers were poked into their ears and mouths, causing a humiliating spectacle to the wretched captives who were honorable free men just a few days earlier. The price of the slave was determined by many things, such as physical condition, health, age, strength, social standing, and skills. Pretty crazy when you read an account, like an actual real life account of what it was to go through that entire process. Can you imagine if you're just there one day on whatever in Italy, and you know you're a mother, your husband is working the land, and then your baby boy is running saying mommy, mommy, and then suddenly out of nowhere these animals come and take you, and then you got to go through all of that process, and then that little kid, and then the woman is raped, and then the husband has to go. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, obviously we know slave trade. We know about the whole Spanish and the Portuguese. We know that. We know the slave trade that eventually was here in America, which, thank the Lord, America became America in 17 well, 1776 when they declared independence, but we didn't really become America till like 10, 15 years after that. But thank the Lord that it only took, and I know it sounds rude to say this, but I'm just in the context of history, it only took up until the year 1861, which is roughly about 80 years after we became America, for a president to finally stand up to this savagery. And thank the Lord for Abraham Lincoln, who publicly pronounced he wanted to end slavery. And then we even had a war to get rid of them. Now, of course, in the South, Jim Crow laws, all of that, and that's all inexcusable. That's what I'm saying. That we were even talking about this.
Yeah.
How could you call yourself a Christian back in those days and have a slave? It is abhorrent. When Paul gave us the exact model, and he gave it to us 2,000 years ago in the book of Philemon. And if you look at the book of Philemon, all of those beautiful slaves that were on all those plantations, most of them were Christian. They would even have their little services in the little shacks in the back. How could that slave owner, whatever, Billy Bob, whatever he is, how could he justify having Christians as his own slaves? Did he not have the book of Philemon? Did he never read the book of Philemon? Did they ban the book of Philemon in the entire South? All right. And once again, I'm going off on a tangent. Many slaves worked on state projects such as quarrying stone, like I said, to build things, chopping down trees, mining, repairing harbors, digging canals, and constructing buildings. So basically the same thing the Jews were doing for 400 years in Egypt. Mm-hmm. Now these people are doing it. If they collapsed on the job, they were beaten by their cruel masters until they got up or died. That's a nice workplace, a policy there. You know what? The guy just collapsed because he's probably dehydrated or he's in pain or whatever. And then they just keep beating him until he gets up. So in other words, the guy's already down. You keep beating him, expecting him to get up. I mean, come on. This isn't a Rocky movie. These are real life people, Female slaves. Let's talk a little bit about the Fifi slaves. Female slaves had to endure unspeakable horrors. A large percentage of the slaves captured by Muslims were females destined as sex slaves. These guys are animals. Many were taken into the harems of Muslim leaders. Female slaves were also sold as household servants. I'm guessing the ugly ones. Sexual slavery was a central part of the Ottoman slave system throughout the history of the institution. Females were treated with great cruelty. In 1814, get this, Swiss explorer Johann Burckhardt wrote of his travels in Egypt and Nubia. That's why they say that my Nubian queen. All right. Where he saw the practice of slave trading. This is what he wrote. He wrote a book called Travels in Nubia. I frequently witnessed scenes of the most shameless indecency, which the traders who were the principal actors only laughed at. I may venture to state that very few female slaves who have passed their 10th year reach Egypt or Arabia in a state of virginity. All of those little girls. Very few female slaves who have passed their 10th year reach Egypt or Arabia in a state of virginity. Can you just imagine? It isn't just Aisha, boys and girls. It isn't just Aisha. Look at this. All of these little girls that were taken as slaves, very rare of them that they arrived still in a state of virginity. In other words, they were raped. They were raped. They were raped. Many slaves were forced to row war galleys. You know those boats back in the days, like the Vikings, where they would have the row war galleys. That was before the sail ship was invented. They had to work so strenuous that thousands died or even went mad while chained to the oar. These were called galleoti. And there was a great demand for them until sailing ships replaced galleys in the late 17th century. At the peak of the Barbary pirating, 10 to 15,000 slave rowers were required for their fleets. Some in the Turkish Sultan's galleys rowed, get this, for years without setting foot on shore. Can you imagine? They even had to sleep on their rowing benches. But yet we're a religion of love and peace, right? They were chained by their wrists to the oar itself and also by their ankles, which were attached to a chain that ran the length of each bench and was bolted to the ship's ribbing. Slaves who needed to relieve themselves, so in other words, you got to do poo-poo. Slaves who needed to relieve themselves could make their way to the opening at the hull side at each side of their bench, known as the borda. So in other words, at the end of each of their bench, they had enough slack to where they could go and pee and poop or whatever. Dragging their part of the chain and presumably climbing over their sleeping companions. So in other words, of course, everybody's just chained to this thing. It's just the most horrible conditions one can imagine. They were under the control of cruel masters who could beat them at will, the slaves. And it's really sad to see the brutality, I guess I'm gonna say, of it. You know, it's just brutal. And I'm not gonna be ignorant and say, you know what, America didn't do it. Yes, America did it.
Of course.
You know, and I get it, and I understand it. I didn't know that they were doing it, and that's really where the part comes in. Of course, everybody has atoned. You know, I know that Portugal and Spain, they've done a lot of work towards, you know, mending those fences. How comes I've never heard the Muslims, number one, talk about this, and number two, do some sort of atonement for it, you know? So, but once again, they don't want you to know this. That's kind of the thing.
And even here in America, we're still kind of trying to, like, reparations, things, all that. They're still very much in the civil political realm. And we're still talking about it, but
250 years, we're still, and we're gonna keep talking about it, and it's a conversation that'll never end, you know. But I just don't understand why I've never heard this conversation about Islam,
and they're trying to hide it too.
Of course.
So obviously, we've been going over the history of slavery in Islam, but there's still going on in modern times in specific parts of Arabian Muslim countries. Maybe you can explain it to us.
Yeah, they still do in a couple countries. They still do have slavery. In the 1950s, Saudi Arabia's slave population was estimated at 450,000. So this is literally 75 years ago. It was about 20% of their population. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
To think that 20% of your population are slaves. Slavery is still practiced widely in Sudan and Mauritania. In Mauritania, slavery has existed since the Arabs conquered it in the 12th century, although they abolished it in 1981. They actually signed it into law, but nobody enforces the law. Mm-hmm. Literally nobody enforces the law. And they estimate that there's anywhere from 100,000 to more than 500,000 slaves currently right now in Mauritania. Slaves are used for labor, for sex, and for breeding. The property of their masters, they are passed down through generations, given as wedding gifts or exchanged for camels, trucks, guns, or money. So it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible scenery, really, to think about. But yeah, there still is some sort of slavery going on, even though they did sign laws that kind of ban it. But nobody is really talking about that. So. Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to shift gears from...
How long have we been running?
45 minutes. Shift gears from the Muslim slave trade to now more the modern day situation going on, mostly in Europe, on God's judgment upon apostate Christianity. And the author of this book was kind of talking how modern day Christianity in Europe, you know, Orthodoxy and Catholicism, kind of, it's straying away from that simple New Testament faithful love for God, zeal for God that we see in the New Testament, and going towards this powerful, political, sacramental, I don't know that word actually.
Sacramental?
Yeah, sacramental style, and how he's using the Muslims to judge upon Europe. So maybe you can explain that for us.
Okay, yeah. The writer of this book, he shifts gears to where now he kind of takes it more into a realm of what we are seeing, what we have seen for the last 1400 years through Islam is a judgment from God. In other words, God is using the Muslims to do all of this stuff. Now, why do they come up with that assumptions? Okay. In the Old Testament, all throughout the Old Testament, what would happen when the people of God would go away from God? Judgments would arrive. In the Old Testament, it's replete with judgments, and it's also replete with prophecy on judgments. I mean, if you read the book of Ezekiel, if you read the book of Isaiah, it's all judgments. Mm-hmm. The point is, God is loving and merciful, and he is slow to anger, but it gets to a point where enough is enough. Enough is enough. The kingdom of Israel, Solomon's kingdom, when Solomon dies, the kingdom splits, right? I'm going to give you a history lesson here. The kingdom splits. You have the northern kingdom, which is called Israel, and you got the southern kingdom, was called Judea. There were 10 tribes of Israel that were part of the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom was Benjamin and was Judah. Mm-hmm. The northern kingdom, every one of their kings were horrible. Every single one of their kings were bad. They did not do what was right before God. The southern kingdom had some good ones, but most of them were bad. But they did have some good ones. Now, what happens? About 250 years pass. They even set up a temple up there for sacrifices up in the northern kingdom because they didn't want to go down to Jerusalem. God allowed, after 250 years of this apostate Judaism that they got going on there, none of their hearts were right before God. God judges the northern kingdom of Israel. How does he judge them? He uses, because remember, God is sovereign overall. He uses the Assyrians. The Assyrians came from way over there in the Middle East. He used the Assyrians. This is the time of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians came down and they completely destroyed the entire northern kingdom. Completely gone, wiped off. The Assyrians also wanted to take over the southern kingdom, but could not. God did not allow them to do that. So in other words, we have here a picture. And if you go back even further, we can go back to the time of David where God used the Philistines. Mm-hmm. The Philistines were there and God used them because guess what? Saul was not doing things right, and the country itself was not doing things right. And then, of course, you can even go back further than that. And you can even go back all the way to the beginning, to the flood, At the end of the day, God is going to judge. When people don't do things according to what God has planned for them, God is going to find a way to get his purpose done. So then the northern kingdom is wiped out. God then, about 100 and it was in the year 722, then in 605, so 115 years later, God uses a whole other kingdom. He uses the Babylonians. And he uses the Babylonians to then now judge the southern kingdom because the southern kingdom was not doing right before the eyes of the Lord. And it wasn't just one time. The southern kingdom came back several years later and took more and then took them captive. Among the first ones was Daniel. Mm-hmm. So Daniel was among the first ones taken, And then God allows for the Babylonians to come back in the year 586 before Christ. So in other words, this was 2,600 years ago. And then not only does he take them all captive with them, they destroy the temple, the house of God. In other words, the point that I'm making here, and then we can keep talking about the Greek Empire, we could talk about the Roman Empire and how God ultimately judges the people unless they're doing right. The writer here, what he's focusing on is when the early church that was pure, that was holy, that was right, when they started to shift. And all of those shifts happened when they started to go into the sacramental type of view. Nowhere in the New Testament does it talk about priests. It says that we're all priests. You're a priest. I'm a priest. But it doesn't say anything about this liturgy, about this sacrifice, about this. When the church started to move away from the purity of the gospel, from the purity of the interpretation of the gospel, and they started to stick in these heresies, they started to go from simple, like for instance, as the centuries passed after the days of the apostles, large numbers of churches turned from the simple New Testament faith to the heresies of sacramentalism, such as infant baptism and the Mass, sacerdotalism, which is the priesthood, and the papacy. You know, when did God institute the papacy? Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine in the 4th century. After the fall of the western portion of the empire, that was in the year 476, with its headquarters in Rome, the center of Christendom shifted east to Constantinople. So now you had a split. The Byzantine Empire was Christian, but it was apostate. Byzantine, that's the Byzantine is the Orthodox Church, just so you know. Not the Roman Catholic, it is the Orthodox Church. Byzantine heresies include salvation through baptism and the sacraments, infant baptism, the priesthood, a form of transubstantiation in which the wafer of the Mass becomes the actual body of Christ, Mary as the mother of God, we talked about that, Theotokos, prayers for the dead, prayers to Mary, intercession of the saints, the canonicity of the Apocrypha, miracle working icons, and holy relics, among other things. Islam conquered the Christian Byzantine Empire and part of the Christian Europe, which was largely Roman Catholic. The entire region was first evangelized, and where the apostolic churches existed before became apostate and was conquered by the Muslims. They destroyed countless church buildings and turned others into mosques. An example is the beautiful Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. So the idea is the church became apostate, just like Israel had done in the Old Testament. And just like Israel, when they became apostate, the Lord judged them, Yahweh judged them the same way. When the Christian church became apostate, when it became Roman Catholic-y, when it became Orthodox, when it started with the infant baptism, with all the sacramentalism, with the liturgy, with all the heretical things. Because when we did the 3 episodes on the Catholic Church, heretical things, the Mary as your intercessor, none of that is in the Bible. So once the church started doing that, God used the Muslims to say, wake up. And they didn't wake up. And today we just say, oh, they're crazy terrorists, right? But the Lord is allowing this judgment on the apostate church. That's why thank the Lord again for Martin Luther. Thank the Lord for Ulrich Zwingli. Thank the Lord for John Calvin. Thank the Lord for Martin Bucer. Thank the Lord for all of those reformers that got us out of that deadly system, that horrible dark system, that apostate system that to this day has millions of people enslaved in their lives. Okay, let's keep going. Islamic terrorism is a further judgment upon apostate Christianity in our day. Many of the nations that are targeted by Islam are nations that are historically and nominally Christian. America, England, and Europe. Those are the big 3 that they love to attack. The more advanced the apostasy in a particular region, the more success Islam has had. The countries in Europe where Islam has made its greatest inroads are the countries where Christianity is most polluted. Of the 24 million Muslims in Europe, there are 2 million in Roman Catholic France and more than 1 million in Germany with its apostate Lutheran Church. German Lutheranism was the mother of damnable theological modernism in the 19th century, which is true. Almost every liberal theologian is German. It is actually pretty interesting. So yeah, that's what I think about that. I don't know if you want to ring up this next section.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it last week at the end of the podcast how throughout Europe and especially like the bigger countries like Britain and France and Germany, there are areas of the big cities in Paris and London that are no-go zones.
What? What do you mean no-go zones?
Essentially, the government and the police and law enforcement are not able to work in those areas.
So wait, you mean to tell me that in modern day, in parts of Europe, there are no-go zones?
Yes.
Where, like, for instance, if you are not a Muslim, you're not allowed in there.
No.
And you mean to tell me this is actually going on?
Yes.
In actual countries? In European countries?
In European countries.
Wait. So you're telling me that modern day, the Muslims are basically taking over sections of a city?
Yeah.
And they're not allowing anybody to get in there?
And they practice Sharia law. So they're imposing their own government.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know why I did all of that because I'm just going to read it all now, right? Yeah. Do you want to say anything else?
Well, obviously, it's just incredibly scary to think about that, and especially because it could eventually be happening in our country here, in our big cities.
It will. Yeah. Junior alluded to the fact that it is scary, and yes, the stuff that I'm going to read to you right now is scary. I'm not going to lie, because it makes you think. It makes you think, okay, these Muslims with the tolerance and the peace, are these those same Muslims or are these real Muslims? Once again, I would say that everything I'm going to read right now, these are the actual Muslims that in their eyes, they're going to go to heaven. They're all going to go to hell, but it's fine. And then all of the beautiful hugging Habibi, Abu Laylas, all of my friends over there in all the markets in Dubai, because I made friends in every single one, even though I fleeced them all. But okay. All of those guys are actually not real Muslims. So let's see what's going on in the world right now. And just to give you an idea, this is what is currently going on in the world that you live in the world that you think is safe, in the world that you think everything is okay. This is what the Muslims are doing today. I'm not going back in history. We did that already, been there, done that. We're talking about today. There are no-go zones in France, Germany, Britain, and other parts of Europe where Muslims are in such complete control. Excuse me. A little cough there. Where Muslims are in such complete control, get this, that the police don't typically intervene. And Sharia law is enforced rather than national and local law. So the Muslims have taken parts of a town, they've shut it off, the police are not allowed to go in there, and they've imposed Sharia law, which supersedes the laws of Germany, France, Britain, all of that. So in other words, they've basically created their own little world, their own little city, and no one is allowed to go in there. In France, they are called zones urbaines sensibles, sensitive urban zones. That's a name that they try to make it cute. Sensitive urban zones. Can you imagine if they call like a ghetto sensitive urban zones? Like, why don't you just call it what it is? Radical idiots that are taking over the world. Like, what is the anagram for that? Radical idiots that are taking over like radio, whatever.
Ratio.
The following is excerpt from, how do you say that word? I always have troubles with that word. Excerpted.
I think excerpt. I don't know.
Like with a, because it has an ed at the end. Okay, try to say it.
It might be excerpted.
From a report published by the Gatestone Institute in 2011. So this is a 2011 report. You guys are going to love this. Oh, you're actually going to hate it. It's scary, but listen up. Many of the no-go zones function as microstates governed by Islamic Sharia law. Host country authorities, so in other words, the host country, France, Germany, UK, all of them, host country authorities effectively have lost control in these areas and in many instances are unable to provide even basic public aid, such as police, firefighting, and ambulance services. The no-go areas are the byproduct of decades of multicultural policies that have encouraged Muslim immigrants to create parallel societies and remain segregated rather than become integrated into their European host nations. So in other words, these no-go zones are a byproduct of policies that governments have put up that are basically Islamophobic, that kind of separated the Muslims. So then now the Muslims are, all right, fine. If you want to separate it, we'll just create our own deal. This is our own little state. In the Tower Hamlets area of East London, I actually looked these places up, these towns. I wanted to zoom in to see like if I could, I don't know, if I could see something. And then I looked up restaurants in those areas, and they had like pizzerias and all that. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it isn't completely like, they're not just completely blasphemous Sharia law people. In the Tower Hamlets area of East London, also known as the Islamic Republic of Tower Hamlets, for example, extremist Muslim preachers called the Tower Hamlets Taliban regularly issue death threats to women who refuse to wear Islamic veils. Neighborhood streets have been plastered with posters declaring, "You are entering a Sharia-controlled zone. Islamic rules enforced." They actually have signage. And street advertising deemed offensive to Muslims is regularly vandalized or blacked out with spray paint. That's in that one area. Let's go to another area of the town. In the Bury Park area of Luton, Muslims have been accused of ethnic cleansing by harassing non-Muslims to the point that many of them move out of Muslim neighborhoods. In the West Midlands, 2 Christian preachers have been accused of hate crimes for handing out, this is hate crimes, they're accused of hate crimes. Why? Because they were handing out gospel leaflets in a predominantly Muslim area of Birmingham. So just by you handing out a tract in one of these places, you actually get accused of a hate crime.
If that's a hate crime, what's their entire history?
Exactly. It's a hate crime for me to say Jesus loves you, but then you can go and rape and kill my wife and steal you and cut my head off. That's not bad, right? That's not a hate crime. Okay, good. Once again, they're blinded by the devil. Say that one. Say that city name.
Leytonstone.
In East London, the Muslim extremist Abu Izzadeen heckled, get this, he heckled the former Home Secretary John Reed. Their Home Security, just so you know, is equivalent to our Secretary of State. Like, this is cabinet level. You know what he said? How dare you come to a Muslim area? Can you imagine that he heckled, how dare you, Secretary of State or Home Secretary, come into a Muslim area? In other words, this is our world.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This is actually going on, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually happening. In France, now we went from England, let's go to France now. In France, large swaths of Muslim neighborhoods are now considered no-go zones by French police. At last count, there are, guess how many? In France, there are 751 sensitive urban zones. 751. As they are euphemistically called, the ZUS, whatever, sensitive urban zones. A complete list of the zones can be found on a French government website, complete with satellite maps. I'm going to look this up, and precise street demarcations. So in other words, you can go to they have a website that tells you where all this at, and then basically don't go in there. An estimated 5 million Muslims live in the zones in France, parts of France over which the French state has lost complete control of it. Even the French admit we have lost control of these zones.
Yeah.
But of course, if you raid them, now you're the bad guy.
It's a hate crime.
Yeah, it's a hate crime. Yeah. If I go in there with the French army and take them down, I'm basically declaring war.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with this? In Belgium, the Belgian capital, Brussels. Now let's go to Brussels, which, by the way, Brussels is about 20% Muslim. Several immigrant neighborhoods have become no-go zones for police officers who frequently are pelted, they throw rocks at them by Muslim kids. In the Kurgim district of Brussels, which often resembles an urban war zone, police are forced to patrol the area with 2 police cars. One car to carry out the patrols and another car to prevent the first car from being attacked. Can you imagine that?
That's crazy.
Let's go to Germany. In Germany, Chief Police Commissioner Bernhard Witthaupt, in an August 1st interview with the newspaper Der Westen, revealed that Muslim immigrants are imposing no-go zones in cities across Germany at an alarming rate. This is for real, guys. I'm telling you, this is a religion that is not built on peace and love and tolerance. It is a religion that is built on conquering. They want to conquer. They want to take over. In the Netherlands, a Dutch court ordered the government to release to the public a politically incorrect list of 40 no-go zones in Holland. They politically incorrect, the verbiage there. What about Sweden? In Sweden, you think of Sweden, you think, oh, they're just nice, right? They eat like pickled herring or whatever. In Sweden, which has some of the most liberal immigration laws in Europe, large swaths of the southern city of Malmö, which is more than 25% Muslim, are no-go zones for non-Muslims. Even Sweden, they're like the sweetest people ever. Even they have a city of Malmö that is more than 25% Muslim, and non-Muslims are not to go in there. Fire and emergency workers, for example, refuse to enter Malmö's mostly Muslim neighborhood without police escorts. Can you imagine that? If there's a fire, you can't even go in there as a fireman without police escorts. That's just what type of people are these? Like the basic humanity, the basic decency. Like, what is wrong with these animals? Okay. In the Swedish city of Gothenburg, Muslim youth have been hurling petrol bombs, in other words, gas bombs, at police cars. In the city's angered district, more than 15 police cars have been destroyed. In Gothenburg's Backa district, youth have been throwing stones at patrolling officers. Gothenburg police have also been struggling to deal with the problem of Muslim teenagers burning cars and attacking emergency services in several areas of the city. But we're all about peace. We're all about tolerance, right? And then this last section I'm going to read to you is quite, I got more. This next section is quite interesting. It's a little bit long, but I really want to read it because I think it's important. In 2015, we have a Jewish journalist that he video recorded the anti-Semitic hate that is in Paris, going on in Paris. And he wrote it, and it ended up being 10 hours of fear and loathing in Paris. So this is his account. This is literally what happened to him that day that he decided to record. Welcome to Paris 2015. Where soldiers are walking every street that houses a Jewish institution, and where keffiyeh wearing men, in other words, if you wear the little hat in the back, and veiled women speak Arabic on every street corner. In modern day Paris, you see Jews are barred from entering certain areas. For 10 hours, I quietly walked down the streets and suburbs of Paris with photographer Dolph Bellhausen documenting the day using a GoPro camera hidden in his backpack. Given the tensions in Paris, which is still reeling from the wave of terrorist attacks, including the murder of Charlie Hebdo, I was assigned a bodyguard. Areas known as tourist attractions were relatively calm. So in other words, all of the nice place, Eiffel Tower, all of that. Mm-hmm. But the further from them we walked, the more anxious I became over the hateful stares, the belligerent remarks, and the hostile body language. At times, it was like walking down in downtown Ramallah. Most women were wearing a veil or a hijab. Most men appeared to be Muslim, and Arabic was just being talked everywhere. So in these areas, no more people talking French. Now it's all Arabic. We decided. Now, where did they learn Arabic? They came from their countries, and this is the point, what I was trying to make to you. They are systematically doing this all throughout the Christian nations, and they are doing this for a certain reason, because they want to conquer. We decided ahead of time that I was to walk through these areas quietly, without stopping anywhere, without speaking to anyone, without so much as looking sideways. My heart was pounding and negative thoughts were running through my head. I would be lying if I said I was not afraid. Walking into a public housing neighborhood, so in other words, like kind of like a ghetto or whatever, we came across a little boy and his hijab-clad mother, who were clearly shocked to see us. What is he doing here, mommy? Doesn't he know that he will be killed? The boy asked. This is a boy. Incredible. Over at a nearby street, I was lambasted with bad words. At a nearby cafe, fingers were pointed at us. And moments later, two thugs were waiting for us on the street corner. They swore at me. They yelled Jew and spat at me. Two youths were waiting for us on the next street corner, and they had apparently heard that a Jew was walking around their neighborhood. They made it clear to us that we had better get out of there, and we took their advice. A few more minutes, and this would have been a lynching, the bodyguard told me as we were getting into the car. Leave this area right now. This is Paris. Guys, this is Paris. This is Paris that we're talking about. But it doesn't just stop there. There are 80 million Muslims in Russia, where the apostate Russian Orthodox Church reigns. 80 million Muslims in Russia. That's a lot of Muslims. Consider England with its apostate Anglican Church. Get this. In 1953, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest office, in the Church of England, said that there is no such thing as revealed truth. Can you imagine if the highest guy of your faith says there is no such thing as revealed truth? It gets worse for them. In 1961, Archbishop Michael Ramsey said this, that heaven is not a place for Christians only. Does that sound like a true Bible-believing Christian?
No,
okay.
Of course not.
In 1982, Archbishop Robert Runcie said he was an agnostic as to why Jesus suffered on the cross. In 1984, it gets worse for him. David Jenkins, Anglican Bishop of Durham, described Christ's bodily resurrection as a conjuring trick with bones. That same year, the Associated Press reported that only 20 of 31 Church of England bishops polled insisted that Christians must accept Jesus as God. So there were actually 11 that said that you don't really have to accept Jesus as God. So they're what, universalists? In July 31st, 1994, the Sunday Times reported that at least 100 Anglican priests were atheists. Yep, that's what's going on. So is it any surprise that England is being overrun with Muslims? Between 2000 and 2011, the Muslim population doubled in England from 1.5 million to 2.7, or almost 5% of the total population. 3 million people live in households where no adult speaks English as their primary language. In London, white British, they are now the minority. More recently, in the aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, the BBC surveyed 1,000 British Muslims and found that, get this, 24% of them, so in other words, 240 of them, consider violence against those who publish images of the Prophet is justified. So in other words, if I put out an image of Muhammad, they can do violence. 24% of them. That's a large amount of Muslims. Asked whether Muslim clerics preaching that violence against the West can be justified are out of touch with mainstream Muslim opinion, 45% disagreed. Incredible. Put it another way, nearly half of British Muslims stand comfortably by those clerics who justify violence against the West. Nearly half of the British Muslims are okay with that. Moreover, 56% of Belgian and 64% of Austrian Muslims responding to a survey that was done in 2008 agreed that Jews cannot be trusted. And indications are strong that Muslim attitudes towards Jews have only worsened. And I'm going to end with this. Clearly, we are watching trends that stretch across all of Europe. The issue here is one of trends. And these trends, which involve hundreds of thousands of radical fundamentalist Muslims, paint a deeply disturbing picture. This is what's going on in the world that we are living in. Maybe we've done ourselves a disservice by only going to the nice nice areas,
touristy areas.
Touristy areas. You know, maybe we should take a walk. I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. I mean, we went to Paris, and we just walked down the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe. You know, it was a little sketchy in the subways, but yeah. I mean, I would never think this was going on there.
No.
And of course, once again, they don't tell you this, and it is not recorded. And you know, the producer's gonna make her way to make sure that people see this. Now that people have seen her. So yeah, that's what we have. Next week, we're going to start a series on Islam and women.
Yeah.
And I'm going through a book. I've already read the book, but I'm going back through it to highlight it so that I know what to talk about. And I'm having difficulties not highlighting everything. And that's why I told you we got to look at it to see. Because it might take a lot longer than I thought originally. So that's what's going on. What do you got?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's just to now see and know that the massacres and it's just absolute hatred against humanity, against people, and especially against godly people, against Christians. It's just so, and it almost it makes you emotional in a way, because you know that these people are believers and they're going out and enslaving and killing and raping women and children alike, and it's just it's sad to know that people, especially here in America, that we don't have these issues quite yet that they're having in Europe, that we don't know about this stuff. So it's just sad to know that.
No, I can tell
these
you,
things are happening.
If we had no-go zones in America, we'd know about it.
Yeah,
that would
course.
be plastered national news.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm confident that we don't have this problem yet. Doesn't mean that it can't turn into a problem.
Yeah, of course.
The difference is that we, you know, at least if Trump is the president, he's sending everybody down there. You know, I mean, we don't got to worry about that, which is probably why they don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't come here. You know, even if you have a softer president, I just think that they know that those type of cells work better in those European countries, as opposed to a country like America that flat out is like, you know, if you're a Muslim and you're a radical, we're gonna get you.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And I think it is spreading to North America. I think in Canada, like Toronto, there's a lot more Muslims than there are here in the U.S.
Yeah, there's a ton of Muslims in Toronto.
Yeah, so
all throughout Canada.
Yeah. So it'll eventually get worse. And reading through a lot of this stuff that we just talked about, the no-go zones, it almost feels like when we went through Revelations in Sunday school, the judgment on the world is it's almost looking like this is going to be the judgment once they get through the entire world eventually. So, but yeah,
it's crazy.
No,
Scary stuff, boys and girls.
So I guess the only thing we could do is just be prepared and be knowledgeable and be able to defend our faith and our Bible and our beliefs.
That's what it's all about. Look, for every one radical that's gonna walk up to you with a bomb attached to his chest and push a button, there's a lot that are not. And once again, I don't want to cast a wide brush over everybody. Once again, every Muslim that I have personally encountered, of course, I'm a tourist. I'm a mark.
Yeah.
You know, like they see dollar signs. But independent of the dollar signs, man, there is something very human and very sweet about them. But then you have the bad apples. But then, like I said, are the bad apples the true Muslims because they're actually following the Quran the way they should? You know, that's the part that gets scary. You know, when you read through this information and you understand that the radical guy, the guy with the bomb on his chest, the guy that hijacks airplanes and runs them into buildings, those guys are actually the real Muslims, and the sweet, loving Abu Laylas, who are the nicest guys in the world, are actually not doing what the Quran says. So Abu Layla should never hug me. I'm a Christian. He should never give me a hug. He should never call my wife to see how she's doing, to see if we made it back okay. Those are things he should not, because I'm a kafir.
Yeah.
So, but once again, that's where you get sticky. Are they hardline interpreters of the Quran? Or are they kind of like the golden age of Islam, where you had a bunch of rulers that they weren't really focused too much on the literal interpretation? And then that's what allowed the society to flourish. When they allowed for learning and for growth and for rights and for all of that. But once you get the nut jobs that interpret it the real way, that's when you start to get everything that we've talked about. And it all ends in death or being raped or being a slave. And it all revolves around killing or sex. I don't know why. It is obviously from the devil. There is nothing godly in anything that we've just said. There is zero godliness in any of the doctrines, and especially in the history of this religion. There is no God in it. All it is world domination, oppression of women, slavery, sex, and death. That is all. That's what it is. And you cannot tell me that this is a godly religion, that Allah is godly and he's pure, when the leader in whom Allah used to transmit this false religion to the society, he was having sex with a 9-year-old girl. I cannot say that God is okay with that. So that's my thoughts on that. So, But yeah, next week we're going to talk about the whole women thing. And, that's when it starts to get really gross.
Gross and sad, because those are their own people. It's not even going out to their enemies. It's their own population.
Yeah, it's not like you're gonna go and like do this to a kafir. Okay, fine, that's a slave. You conquered. You killed her husband. But man, this is what they do to their own women. So and just the real warped, horrible view that they have on marriage. Once we get to that, you could look. Even through that, you guys will see that this is not a godly religion. You will see that this is from the devil, because even their views on marriage is of the devil. But we'll get to that next time.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Insightful episode, sad episode, shocking episode. And next week will be just as, if not more shocking.
God bless you all.
Thank you.